Now, hopefully, it seems that Omicron is towards the last legs of its Bharat Yatra, having washed through the bodies of so many of us. The numbers are really declining. So, we are also bravely, with fingers crossed, with a prayer on the lip, are coming back to our offices to work in limited strength to begin with. That's the reason you see me in my studio. And am I not so happy to be back to normal? Let's see, as long as it lasts. We hope this time it's for real. Now, just as I said, we are coming back to our offices. This is also the time for Indian politics, in a way, to come back to its office. Now, what do we mean? In India, there's always politics. Or as the Prime Minister said the other day, there is always an election. In fact, he said in his interview to ANI that if you had one country, one election, then you will not have this problem of having to do everything or having to balance everything with elections, or all actions of the government being seen as motivated by the next election. So it's not as if politics ever goes on a vacation in India. Politics never goes on a deep freeze in India. And right now, 5 states are going for elections. So politics is not coming out of the freeze in that sense. Politics is coming out of its lockdown in the sense that once again, now this is not unprecedented, but once again, you have an effort by many opposition leaders to call the rest of them together, to put the rest of them together to form, if not a front, some kind of a joint action plan to counter a strong center under Narendra Modi. Right now, nobody is talking about setting up a federal front, which was the talk before 2017 elections. KCR, K. Chandrasekhar Rao in Telangana had started the talk, and others have joined in. And that's an idea that's been tried before. Occasionally, it succeeded a little bit, but every time it succeeded a little bit, as say in the formation of the United Front government under Deve Gowda, right? Or even earlier under VP Singh. Right? Each time it has succeeded, it has failed so spectacularly that just the sight of these diverse leaders, diverse political forces together actually gets a lot of the mainstream voters very alarmed. That's the reason we've had this phenomenon since the rise of Narendra Modi, that while in the states, many leaders are able to hold their own because they are not seeking a vote against Modi. And also because BJP is not seeking a vote for Modi, they are able to do well. Opposition leaders are able to do well in those elections in terms of local issues, local appeal. But when it comes to national elections, they get decimated. And we have seen this in many states. Odisha is a very good example. Okay, Naveen Patnaik's party did not get decimated in parliament election, but BJP got quite a few seats in parliament election, whereas in the assembly, BJD was widely dominant, right? So we have seen that change come about in Indian politics. What is right now happening is therefore more subtle and more nuanced. These are chief ministers of non-BJP parties, and they are coming together not to get rid of Narendra Modi, or not to then choose one leader amongst themselves and say, look, you will now lead our Rath in the next battle against Narendra Modi. 2024 is far away. But this is to gather strength, to negotiate, to build some kind of a collective negotiating position on some center state issues. So this is a period in our politics where center state issues have come to center stage, right? Rahul Gandhi mentioned this in his speech when he said India is a federation, a union of states. Of course, it was then spun by the opposition, by the BJP, into meaning that Rahul Gandhi thinks India is not a nation. But our constitution begins by describing us as a union of states. Now, union of states means states have their powers, center has their powers. We are not a union of states as USA. So our states are not that autonomous, right? But still, there is a fair bit of autonomy that the constitution guarantees the states. Now, the states think that with the rise of a strong central government with a full majority, where the central government does not have to negotiate with regional parties to get their votes in Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, as had been the case in the previous 25 years. Say, 1989 to 2014 in different ways because Narasimha Rao also was a minority government. Now there is a government with the full majority. It does not need regional parties or the states at the center. So their bargaining position has weakened. And that is where states are now searching for common ground. So who's the one leading it? So first of all, Mamta Banerjee has been quite proactive in the area. M.K. Stalin in Tamil Nadu. Now, these are big states. Once again, we define any state that sends 40 or more MPs to national parliament as big states. So Tamil Nadu, West Bengal are both big states. And both these leaders dominate their states, although the BJP did quite well in West Bengal in parliament elections. They also got a bunch of seats in assembly elections, but Mamta is strong there. Stalin, on the other hand, has no BJP threat where he is in Tamil Nadu. So these two leaders have made their moves. At the same time, look at the ones who have listened to them. KCR. KCR has not only listened to them, but he is also talking about a joint front now. And he has called Stalin, and he even sent a special plane to fetch Tejasvi Yadav from Bihar to come into Hyderabad for negotiations. Although Tejasvi Yadav's party is not in power in Bihar, but they have quite a few seats in the assembly. They are a political force. So he's reached out to them. You can now see that many of these chief ministers are maneuvering. The fascinating thing is the different pace at which they are moving, also the different directions that many of them are taking. So first of all, let's do an inventory of all non-BJP or non-BJP supported chief ministers in the country. So that's a dozen of them. There is Charanjit Singh Channi in Punjab, in Rajasthan, there is Ashok Gehlot. Then in Chhattisgarh, there is Bhupesh Baghel. In Jharkhand, Hemant Soren. In West Bengal, as you go eastwards, Mamta Banerjee. Again, you go south of West Bengal, you see Naveen Patnaik. Then Jagan, Y.S. Jagan Mohan Reddy in Andhra Pradesh, KCR in Telangana, Stalin in Tamil Nadu, Pinarayi Vijayan in Kerala, Uddhav Thackeray in Maharashtra, although it's a three-party coalition. And also there is Arvind Kejriwal. So let us see how each one of these is acting and why. So there is Channi, in any case, is too caught up in elections right now. So the Congress chief ministers, that is Channi, Gehlot and Bhupesh Baghel, they are in one category. They will do exactly what the High Command tells them to do. In any case, they are members of one party. So the party will take a view. Chief ministers individually do not count. And we do know that earlier, when Mamta Banerjee had come and met Uddhav Thackeray, and she had talked about this front of sort of non-BJP or opposition chief ministers against Narendra Modi and the center, that is when, in fact, Shiv Sena had panicked a little bit and they did course correction because they didn't want Congress to think that Congress is being excluded because their government needs the Congress to survive. So Sanjay Raut, immediately of Shiv Sena, had come to meet Rahul Gandhi and said, look, after that he made a statement that there cannot be an opposition front without the Congress party. That was to reassure and assuage the Congress party. So Congress party's three chief ministers are in that category. They will go with the party view. Then there is Mamta Banerjee. She's very proactive. She's very proactive because her main adversary in her state is the BJP. Her threat is only from the BJP. She's finished the left. Congress has finished itself in West Bengal. So she has to fight the BJP, and she now has some kind of a successor coming up. So she has stakes in the future too. Plus, she isn't that old by Indian political standards. She's quite young and she can eye a bigger position. That's the reason she went to Goa. She went to Goa to basically make the point that TMC is not confined to one state. Now, Goa is a small state. You can make a big impact there, even without winning the seats, by just putting up lots of hoardings, talking about it, getting a few defectors on board. And that's what she did. That was her way of saying, I'm a multi-state party. Now, with her, you find that today the most enthusiastic other people are KCR and Stalin. KCR for a long time was keeping an ambivalent approach towards the BJP. because on many issues he went along with the BJP, on many national issues his party voted with the BJP, but now he has been increasingly distancing himself. He had done this in 2019 before national elections, but he did quite poorly by his standards in his state because BJP got a bunch of seats that nobody expected. He did not expect them to take. And since then, he has seen BJP rising in Telangana. Now, because BJP is rising in Telangana, he is worried about the BJP. And that's the reason he's again become so proactive in trying to stitch together that anti-BJP, if not a front, an alliance of non-BJP chief ministers, at least for push for greater federalization of governance in India. And I will come to that point and explain that in terms of what it means. So KCR is coming from there. Stalin has now been given, he sniffed some ambition, which is sort of interesting because usually Dravid parties have tended to be insular in Tamil Nadu because they know that their own politics is not extendable to other states. But now on the issue of social justice, on the issue of caste, there is a Tamil Nadu model. I think there is some sense in his camp or maybe in his mind that he can have a role outside of Tamil Nadu. But the fact is, he also has to keep his back foot in his state because in his state, his rival is not the BJP. His rival in the state is another regional party, that is AIADMK, which also has an ideology pretty much similar to the DMK's. So he has limitations too. Then you look at others. Naveen Patnaik is very careful. There are some issues where he stays away from the center, but usually he does not pick up any trouble with the center. At the same time, see some of the central schemes where the Prime Minister gets the credit, he keeps those schemes out, like the health scheme. He's done his own health scheme. He's done his own farmer welfare scheme. He does not let those schemes, central schemes, run in his state in the Prime Minister's name, just as Mamta Banerjee doesn't allow those in West Bengal. Otherwise, he is somebody who keeps a low profile. He's not getting involved in any of this. Jagan, again, low profile. We know that there are tensions between him and the BJP now, particularly on the question of Christianity, conversions, etc. There was recently that trouble in Guntur over that Jinnah Tower. Mercifully, that story has faded away now without causing further polarization. But he's also careful. He also has the prospect of a few serious pending cases from the past. And those cases, as we know, can be revived or can be reignited anytime the central government so wishes. Pinarayi Vijayan in Kerala, he's quite content to be there in Kerala, sort of in a corner in his own domain. He has troubles with his governor and he has troubles on the street or in the countryside because of BJP, RSS workers and CPM workers clashing and sometimes some Muslim organizations also getting involved. But beyond that, he has no direct threat from the BJP. He also is a member of a larger party with a footprint in many other states, although it has now faded quite substantially. But the party lets him do his stuff in Kerala and he seems content with that. Thackeray is somebody who now speaks very openly and very strongly against the BJP, even on the issue of Hindutva, because he's now saying something that Congress, NCP, that no other anti-BJP party can say. He's now saying that my Hindutva is more original and more genuine than BJP's Hindutva. BJP's Hindutva is a fake. So he's saying all that, but he's only 1/3 of the strength of the state government in Maharashtra. So once again, while he's the chief minister, the real power there lies with Sharad Pawar. And we have to watch where Sharad Pawar is headed. Looks like Sharad Pawar is sympathetic to these moves or getting opposition chief ministers together. So count Uddhav Thackeray in. The interesting exclusion from all this is Kejriwal, and that's the reason we've kept him as the last in our listing. Now, he's somebody who's defeated Narendra Modi and BJP massively, not once but twice in Delhi. Each time just after the national elections, where BJP and Narendra Modi swept all the seats in Lok Sabha in Delhi. So he's a very strong leader in Delhi, but he's right now confined to Delhi, which is not a full state. It had looked like he was warming up to these alliances with other chief ministers, But it is possible that Mamta's arrival, TMC's arrival in Goa was seen by him as a kind of a betrayal or a threat, that they are coming into a state where I see a chance. And it's a small state. I think if I focus, I can win that state. Why has another opposition party come in there, another opposition party from a faraway state come in there? So basically be a spoiler for me. So maybe that's caused a little tension, but let us see what happens in Punjab. If he wins Punjab, which is not impossible at all, if he wins Punjab, that will burnish his credentials as a likely leader of this new anti-Modi alliance. I'm not saying he'll be an automatic leader of all, he'll not be a Jayaprakash Narayan to that extent, or a VP Singh even, but he will then be seen as a national leader. So that is what he's waiting for, and that is what the rest of the opposition, and I would say Narendra Modi, Amit Shah and the BJP are also waiting for. That's the reason we kept him as the last in this listing of the 12. Now, what are the grievances that these chief ministers have with Narendra Modi? And why is it that they now want this power of collective bargaining? So there is a whole bunch of them. There is interference by the governors, for example. Now, you can say that every central government misuses the governors, but the extent or degree of that misuse is also directly proportional to the majority that the central government has. So once you have a full majority government, their governors can do a lot more. Now look at Maharashtra, for example. Maharashtra Chief Minister has sent a list of 12 members to the Legislative Council that he has nominated, that the state government has nominated. The governor there, former Uttarakhand Chief Minister Bhagat Singh Koshyari, has been sitting on them for more than a year now, right? He's not moving. In Tamil Nadu, Governor R.N. Ravi has sent back the NEET exemption bill because that's very important for Stalin's social justice agenda. He wants his state to be exempted from NEET. That bill R.N. Ravi has sent back, so that is a big grievance for Stalin as well. Similarly, if you look at other states, look at West Bengal. In West Bengal, Mamta Banerjee and Governor Jagdeep Dhankar are like Tom and Jerry. In fact, it's not even, it's so ridiculous, their fight, that sometimes you don't even want to take it seriously. Mamta Banerjee has now blocked Jagdeep Dhankar on Twitter because she says that he keeps writing abusive stuff about her and her officers and sort of gets her hassled or gets her triggered, which is the language that is used these days. So she is blocked. Can you imagine a chief minister blocking her governor, constitutional head of the state, on Twitter? But that is what's happened. That's the quality of the relationship between them. Then there are grievances about misuse of central agencies. And we've seen that lately happen a lot more in Maharashtra, for example. There was the Narcotics Control Bureau, there was ED and NIA as well. The latest provocation now is center taking over total power for posting IAS, IPS, All India Services officers to the center. States resent that also. Plus, states resent many other things. They resent the fact that Prime Minister talks directly with district magistrates. The Interstate Council, for example, which was the one opportunity when the Prime Minister and all the Chief Ministers met from all parties. That council has not met since 2016. So in July 2016. That means for 6 years that hasn't met. Now Mamta Banerjee says that that's been more or less finished, and people from the opposition remind Narendra Modi of the fact that when he was Chief Minister in 2012, he said the meeting of the Interstate Council should be held not once a year, but twice a year. But under him now for 6 years, no meeting has taken place. Again, Planning Commission became Niti Aayog. So what used to be National Development Council, where again chief ministers, key ministers from the center and the Prime Minister met, that got renamed as the Governing Council. That Governing Council also met last in the summer of 2019, that is June of 2019, has not met since then. So Mamta Banerjee has said that Prime Minister Modi has buried now the National Development Council as well. And there are some larger issues, of course. For example, GST. Now, GST is what made a lot of states feel that they were giving up their local taxing powers. Now, it was done by consensus, but too many of the states now believe, particularly non-BJP states, that they are not getting their fair share. and they think that they are not being adequately compensated for the revenues they have lost, although some money has come in. And also, this compensation mechanism will now end in July 2022. They would like this to be extended further, but I think these things are subject to negotiations. Now, what is it that, say, the Prime Minister is saying about this? The Prime Minister responded to this issue or this charge, that is decline of federalism, in his address in Parliament on the debate over the presidential address. Now, there he said, look, you are saying that federalism doesn't work in India. During the pandemic, and during the pandemic is our 2.5 years, I have had 23 meetings with all chief ministers. Give me one example in India's history when the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister, when the Prime Minister and Chief Ministers have met 23 times in such a period. So that is the argument. At the same time, the Chief Minister said that's a formality. And also when these meetings were held, what the Prime Minister said, that was publicized and that was live telecast everywhere. So the Chief Minister say, particularly the opposition Chief Ministers, that at these meetings on COVID, these were like they were attending classes as school kids with the Prime Minister being their teacher, because the only thing that was televised, the only thing that was broadcast was the Prime Minister's address to them. So it's a combination of all these factors that you now see this new churning or this new stirring of federal impulses coming in from non-BJP chief ministers. And this space needs watching as we go ahead, particularly after the results of these 5 state elections.